So hello and welcome to a very important living room conversation on mental health and belonging. My name is Pedro Silva. I'm hosting along with Cecilia Mertens and Irshad and Crystal and Helen, and we are just excited to have you here with us today. We're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves, speak about why we are engaged with LRC, and then go from there. So again, my name is Pedro Silva. I've been volunteering with LRC for about 5 years, and I really like the work that they're doing, drawing people from different parts of life together to have conversations that change our hearts. And so I just want to say hello, and whoever feels ready to speak up, they can go ahead and introduce themselves.
Yeah, I can go. So my name is Helen. I currently in New Jersey, but I go to school in New York. I'm a college student, and I came to LRC because I wanted to host a conversation at my school surrounding identity, and I think like with all the polarization that has been happening in our country, it's important to talk about divisive issues. So that's why I'm here.
I can go after. My name is Irshad Molla. I am a freshman at The Ohio State University. And what drew me was I did a lot of civic and student voice work in high school and like continuing on in college. And I thought LRC would be perfect in kind of combining those things.
Thanks.
My name is Crystal Williams, and I am in Cleveland, Ohio, so up the road from Irshad High. I'm a Living Room Conversations racial equity partner, and I'm a high school teacher during the day.
And I'm Sushila Mertens. I'm from Nevada City, California, and I've been doing conversations for about 5 years. And I also wanted to bring conversations to my community to help people get along.
Thanks. So one of my favorite things about the LRCs are the conversation agreements. And so I will start us off on those. And then as you feel called, you can share one of the conversational agreements, and then I'll close us out. The first one is be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
Show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruptions or crosstalk.
Know any common ground as well as differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you. Speak from your experience. Be considerate of others who are doing the same.
Be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you are answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
And my favorite one, own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored. And do you guys want to agree, or you all want to agree on a signal? Thumbs up would be the signal. Okay, so thumbs up if we're going astray a little bit. So thanks for that. All right, so now we'll get into round one, and we're kind of doing this popcorn style. So if you feel ready to answer, just jump in. And the first question is, what are your hopes for this conversation?
I guess my hopes are that I learn a bit about your experiences in regards to mental health and belonging. I know I've gone through like an interesting journey myself, and so I'm curious what other people's stories are.
Yeah, kind of going off Helen, being like the youth, like it's obviously, I feel like we grew up in a different world when it comes to mental health compared to the adults. So I think it's going to be interesting to see like how we connect.
To piggyback off of those two, I'd say I'm looking to just hear about others people's experiences and maybe making some connections because sometimes I feel like talking about mental health like leaves me on an island by myself.
And I always like to go to conversations because I meet amazing people. And I'm thinking with this conversation being a live conversation, that maybe some of what we say might help some other people be supported and get help if they need it. Find a technique or something.
Yeah, and for me, I'm pretty happy that people are talking about mental health more openly now. In my background, we didn't talk about it, and it was to some degree seen as a weakness to feel like you had to go talk to somebody, or it had to be like, you know, you just talk to, you know, someone from your faith tradition or something, but not getting outside counsel. And I think it's good that we're talking about it in general. And then belonging is huge to be connected with mental health, because I think that a lot of mental health crisis comes from a sense of not belonging. And when one feels left out and alone and they have no one to talk to, it just kind of exacerbates those issues. So I'm hoping that us talking together and people witnessing us talking from, especially with us having so many different backgrounds in this one call, I think is a powerful statement in and of itself. So I'm looking forward to that. So that was round one, and now we're into round two. For those of you who may be watching and have not participated in a living room conversation before, usually they're about 90 minutes, and this will be a little bit more abbreviated. But before we get into the questions, let's just do a quick go around where we fill in the blank, saying mental health is blank and then belonging is blank. So as you feel called, maybe give your definition of what mental health is and then what belonging is.
I'll start. So I think mental health is health. I don't know that we need to continue to separate it. Mental health is health.
Awesome. What about belonging?
Belonging is necessary.
Nice.
I was gonna say mental health is complicated. I feel like people try to make it simpler than it is, and it's like, oh, you do this and you do that. And I think it's okay to accept the fact that it is complicated and it makes no sense sometimes. And then I would say belonging is, like you said, like needed, necessary.
Yeah, I
Go ahead,
agree
Helen.
with Crystal, that mental health is health, and I think a lot of times it's not necessarily seen as that, and sort of an invisible illness, if you might call it, which makes it sometimes harder to get people to believe you or to diagnose necessarily, and it culminates in your well-being and your state of mind and being, I guess it involves a lot of different things, but just like being well and happy with your life, for me at least. And belonging for me is, I guess, having an environment where you feel like you're at home and where you feel people are willing to accept you for who you are. And it's definitely, I think, a vital component of mental health as well, which I agree with.
Yeah. For me, I would say mental health. I would, I guess, agree with Crystal that it is health. A lot of times, people, if you say mental health, they automatically think mental illness, as if there's a status quo of what mental health looks like, and that if you say mental health, then it's like, oh, okay, what's wrong with you if you care about your mental health? Which I don't know if that's uniquely American, but I know that it exists. There's a lot of stigma around it. Belonging as well. It seems that there's an idea of how to belong. And I think belonging is just acceptance is the first ingredient in belonging. So.
And I'd say mental health is our ability actually to have a relaxed and functioning nervous system that works with our body and supports us to function optimally and handle all the challenges that we face in life. And that could be loss, trauma, illness, conflicts. And belonging is about the support system that supports our mental health. And we can't do life alone. We need other people to help us through all these challenges. So.
Nice. All right. And so the next part of round 2 is it says you'll have 1 to 2 minutes to answer one of the following questions. And then we'll spend the rest of our time exploring what has been shared. I'm just going to read the questions simply for folks who might not have this in front of them when they're checking this out. Does your religion or culture or some other aspect of your identity or background influence how you think about mental health? If so, how? The next question we could choose from is, how does your self-concept and relationship with your body impact your mental and emotional health? How has that changed over time? What brought about those changes? And then how do you care for or consider your mental and emotional health? What is the impact of that? And you can answer any of those questions as you feel led.
I'll go. My family and the times I grew up in definitely affected how I think about mental health. And in the early days of the 1920s, people were put in mental institutions. And my uncle was put in a mental institution, and I don't really think he was crazy. I won't go to the whole story, but my mother got lost once in the institution, and she was totally terrified of being thought that she might be, have anything that would put her look like she was crazy or anything. So she never wanted to ask for help, and she had stresses, and she never got any support for her mental health. And when my dad died, she was in a lot of grief and wouldn't ask for help. And she committed suicide at 79. So my journey has been to, if I am not doing well, to go ask for help. And I studied psychology and techniques and meditation and things that would help me calm down and be able to deal with life stresses. So I think my family really influenced me.
Well, thanks for trusting us with that.
Yeah, I think I feel fortunate that I've grown up in a society, or like the same society, but it's like, I guess a lot of people have been more open about talking about issues relating to mental health. And I think when I was growing up, I definitely experienced like a certain level of isolation, maybe partly because of my race or because of just like my personality. And there were like, we had the internet and people posted things and they were like, I feel the same way. I feel this, I feel anxious and I feel depressed. And something about like seeing that that was okay actually made me feel better. And I think for me, I'm kind of answering, I guess, 1 and 3, but when I think nowadays, like whenever I get stressed or like I think I have like anxiety sometimes, and I found like writing my thoughts out helps. We have like a school psychologist, and I do have like friends who kind of are still, I think, I don't know, they're like hesitant to go or to see like going to your school psychologist as like a good thing. They're kind of like, are you okay? Like that sounds like concerning. but I've also like met a lot of people at my school and at my college who are like, you know what, like therapy, like everyone should go to therapy, and that's like like you like denying that fact is maybe like an issue in its own. I'm like, interesting. So I'm grateful that I've had those resources, and I think they've allowed me to kind of um, not necessarily like overcome everything, because like I feel like sometimes mental health issues like they just come up and they're sort of inevitable, and they come and go for me at least. And it's more about learning to accept that fact and like learning to live with it.
Yeah, for me, so in 2021, it was like it was like a lot of events that happened, but I started therapy that year, and it's very interesting. I really liked it. Was definitely not what I expected it to be, because it was more of, you think it's like someone talking at you. It's really someone asking you questions and you're figuring yourself out. Like it's you who's going to pull yourself out of that situation at the end of the day, which was very interesting. So I benefited a lot from going to therapy. But one thing that was interesting, I think Helen was saying this, but like even within the youth, we talk about it a lot. Like people post stuff on Instagram and they're like, everyone needs to go to therapy. But when I told my friends, like I went to therapy, they're still like, it's still a shocker. It's still like, oh, you went to therapy. And if I told them like, you should try it too, they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to. So it's still like, even we talk about a lot, we have kind of reduced the stigma, but it's still a scary step for people to take. It's not as normal as I feel like it seems at times.
Yeah. I know I'm kind of answering question one about religion or culture. And I come from a very religious family. And until a week ago, I was a pastor. And I know that for us, for at least for a while, the idea of not just believing that God would fix everything if you prayed or had enough faith or something like that. Those sorts of ideas, while I guess well-meaning, I think they exacerbate harm, and a lot of times the things that people are dealing with come from, their culture or even their religion or anything, things that have been passed down, like tradition, like ways of handling challenges in life. And our society has changed at a rapid pace, but a lot of times our religions or cultures haven't caught up to that pace. And there are certain things that, like for example, for people have more options in what they can do for a career now. Whereas for generations, we all did what our parents did or didn't do what our parents didn't do, or whatever the case may be. Whereas now you have opportunities to explore new ways of showing up, new kind of career paths, and traditions hold together by things staying the same. And so when a person's trying to do something different than their community, it can make you almost lose your mind, because you might feel, or I can speak for myself and say, I felt that some of the direction I was exploring was just different than my background. And that seemed like I was going against tradition and things like that. And it did make me feel like I was losing it, until I just decided that I would just accept everyone as they showed up and not try to put people in boxes that I was taught, because I was like, I was handed these boxes and now I'm trying to stuff people inside of them, and I don't want to do that anymore. And I'll choose my box, but I'm not going to choose other people's boxes. And those things have kind of helped, just accepting people as they show up and hoping for them what I would hope for myself has helped, and therapy.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. It's hard for me to talk about, because so there's this trope that a strong Black woman, and I think when it comes to mental health, specifically if you're sad or you're dealing with depression, that is seen as weakness, which is the opposite of being this like strong Black woman that society tells us that we have to be. And I'll give a specific example. Like 4 or 5 years ago, I lost my first student. They were murdered.
Mm.
And I remember like wanting to take a moment at work when I found out. And like I felt this need to like go to a stairwell or go someplace where like nobody would see me cry. When I think if someone lost someone younger than them, lost anyone, like people would be free to grieve immediately or have tears and it wouldn't be seen as like, oh, what's wrong with her? Like, what's going on? And even when I think about like this year over like, well, the 2 years that we've been dealing with COVID and like my students have lost family members, and I've lost students this year to violence and things like that. And it's like, sometimes I feel like I need a minute, but then it's like if I take a day, it's like I'm seen as I'm lazy, or like if I cry, it's like, what's wrong with her? Like, it's just like this idea of being a strong Black woman. I think sometimes it's supposed to be seen as like, oh, you're strong, you can do this, you can do that, but it's like that doesn't give me permission to have different emotions. And so when I'm having an emotion that's legitimate, like I am sad because I lost someone, it's like I don't have the permission to do basic things like cry. And I don't think that's everyone else's experience. So it's challenging because I think that's partly because of my race, but also I think it's a generational thing too. When I teach high school, so like my students who are teenagers, they seem to have an understanding that like people are going through things, right? They grew up with the internet. And like I'm in my late 30s and like people my age kind of understand that, but like just a few years older than me, and like certainly like my father, like it's like, what do you mean you have a therapist? Like like you'll be fine, like it's okay. And it's like, no, I need someone to help me through this, like even if it's just to listen. So it's definitely tough. Like sometimes it feels really lonely because it's like, who do I talk to? Because I'm supposed to be strong. And when I'm not, it's like, I don't know who to go to.
Yeah. Thanks for lifting that up. And we're pretty good on time, so we can go a little bit more deeply into these questions. And I think race came up a couple times in this conversation, which I think is an important context in the American framework of, because we're talking about this belonging and mental health in the context of America as well. And while I'm not trying to go down that path like really far, I think that it does speak to how people feel worthy of access to care. There's a messaging inside of the community that some people should just feel lucky or this, that, and that, and then they shouldn't complain, and those things, which also feed into mental health. And also for women, largely as well. And so in the context of what we're talking about, I don't know if any of the other questions that have been lifted up speak to with you all, but the one that talks about how does your self-concept and relationship with your body impact your mental health and emotional health, I think that's an important one, because your body includes, your gender identity, your race, and other things like that as well. So I guess I'll explore that a little bit, and then we have time if anybody else wants to. I'd say that Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about, like, in Between the World and Me, he talks about Black bodies with his son. And I know for me, when I read that book, it gave me a little bit more access to how to frame my experience. I was always aware, like, okay, I'm walking around in a Black body, and I know that there's different ways that my needs are considered in the society. And I think lately I've been paying more attention to the intelligence of my body and the wisdom of my body that is trying to tell me things that I might have ignored because the culture, the prevailing culture. So like now I'm like, oh man, my body's tensing up. Is that because I'm subconsciously stressed about something? And if so, you know, I might talk to somebody with a different type of body that might not relate, you know, and I have to be mindful of that. Like that their experience may be coming because of their relationship to their bodies. And that sometimes determines how we experience belonging as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the one thing we all have in common is that we've been able to break the stigma of going for help. And you know, I also signed up with a therapist for COVID because the fear of, you know, what's out there, are we all going to die? My family, you know, all the stresses that came with COVID on top of life stresses. I just wanted that extra support, and I'm, you know, fortunate to be able to have that. And I also read that book, and it's like, if people don't have the ability to, you know, to be with their emotions and how their body's feeling, like if you're in grief and you suppress your crying, your mental health is not going to be supported with that. And so, like in that book, they also talk about, you know, first responders and people that are dealing with stress every day. If we don't learn how to get rid of stress, then our mental health deteriorates until we explode and we crash, we burn. So, you know, we need to see how our bodies and our minds are dealing with each other so that we can get support. And that's where belonging, the isolation kind of even made people feel less belonging. And so that adds to the stress. So we just been loaded with so much stress the last 2 years. And then with all the hatred and issues racial issues going on, that's more stress. It just keeps building. So, you know, tuning into how you're doing is so important, and then getting that help is so important.
Yeah, continuing off of that and off of what Pedro said, I think at least for me, when it like tying mental health back to belonging. Oh, am I okay? It says my internet's unstable.
It's a little
Okay,
delayed,
cool.
but we can hear you.
Okay. I think growing up, at least, like seeing Asian representation in the media was sort of important, but like lacking to a certain degree. And I think looking back, I didn't really think like that should have affected me a lot, but I do remember like in high school, like part of my anxiety about like my future was like I didn't really feel like I had any role models, or like I didn't feel like there were a lot of people that looked like me that were doing things that I wanted to do necessarily. And it sort of made me feel like I had no path forward. And I think that like my senior year, like part of it was just like sort of a mess with applying to college and stuff. And I think that's like a big mental health moment for a lot of high schoolers. But it's sort of like trying to figure that out. And when it comes to belonging, I think like just having people to reassure you that you're like okay and you're valid. I think like valid is a sort of new term that like a lot of people use now, just to like say like whatever you're feeling, it's okay and it's normal, and whatever you are is also okay and normal. And I think I struggled with feeling normal for a long time and feeling like I was supposed to be on this earth with all the people around me, just because like it felt like everyone else was so different from me to a certain extent. And I think that's like a large root of a lot of like my own personal struggles with kind of like living like a peaceful life, I guess. And there was something else I was gonna say, but I forgot. But yeah, I wanted to maybe talk about just like finding therapy, like I know for a lot of people it is challenging, and I think like thus far I've had school therapists who have been helpful, but I've had relatives and friends who like have like that itself is a journey, and that itself is a hard thing to do. And it can seem daunting. So I'm curious, like, if what your journeys were like in finding like a therapist that actually helped.
Helen, I can speak to that a little bit. So I have been with my therapist for probably, it's been 4 years now. And my journey to therapy, I wouldn't say it was easy. My parents divorced when I was 8, and that was like my first time, my first memory of like having a therapist, but it wasn't very long. Like I think I went to 2 or 3 sessions, and I don't know why I didn't go back. And then when I was in my early 20s, I felt this sense of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I should probably go see someone. And I remember going like twice. Like, she basically was like, oh, yeah, it sounds like you really like to help people. Like, you should consider, like, it was basically like I was looking for life guidance, and she sort of helped me like think about my career. And I was like, okay, well, I guess this is it. Like, and then when I was in my 30s, I noticed that I was having a lot of issues with relationships, romantic relationships. Particularly, I knew it was related to some trauma that I had experienced as a child. And so I was like, I'm at a spot where if I don't work through this, like this is going to continue to impact romantic relationships, but also my relationships with like my friends and things like that. So, but when I was ready to do it, I wanted to see someone who was Black, either a Black male or a Black woman, because I was also having trouble with some racism at work, which is horrifying to think because I'm a teacher. So you would, in my mind, I expect teachers to be really open and like very aware of cultural things, but that was not the case. Like I worked in corporate America for 10 years before I started teaching, and I didn't hear some of the things, some of the insensitive and biased things that I hear from fellow educators. So that was like very hard for me to deal with. So I said, like, I want to be able to go and talk to someone who, when I'm explaining to them what my day-to-day is like, number one, I don't feel like I have to hold back because I don't want to make them uncomfortable, but I also wanted someone who could identify with like what I was going through. And it was really challenging. Like I was on a wait list with a particular company in my area. They have a lot of different therapists, but they have very few therapists who are people of color. But once I started, like I've been with the same therapist for 4 years, and I'm very thankful because sometimes when I do talk about what it's like to just be a Black body in a predominantly white area, and like the looks that I get, or like people locking their door, like I can hear them locking their doors around me, or like can see them grabbing their purse, or those sorts of things that if I say this, I have said this to some of like my white coworkers, and they're like, well, they would do that to anyone. Like having conversations like that with someone who doesn't experience the world that you do, that can make you feel crazy in and of itself. So it was very important for me to find a therapist who I identified with on that level.
Yeah, I had to do the same thing because I had a therapist. The first therapist I had was a white guy, and it was because that's what my insurance would pay for. So that's what I went to. And after a few sessions, if I said something, he'd be like, now, what did that mean? What you just said? I'd say something that, came from my background. And then he would like spend the time asking me stuff about, and I'm like, that's not what I want to talk about right now. And then I was just like, okay, let me just pay more money. And then I found a Black womanist, which is a woman, like a Black feminist Like I found a Black womanist therapist that, because I was raised mostly by Black women, largely, and I felt like I could just talk to her just with no, just go straight at it, and it was like real helpful to not have to translate.
Yeah, I was gonna go what Helen said about like belonging, like you guys were saying with race too. Like people don't understand the power of like representation of like seeing someone that looks like you. So as a young kid, like we were in Chicago at this time, but there was my school was like predominantly white, like any like the news, like the billboards, TVs were all white people. And I was brown obviously at that time. And it was in the third grade and I was like 8 or 9 and we were going on a field trip and it was like 90 degrees outside and I covered like I had a big jacket on and like sweatpants and I tried as much as I could to cover my skin. My mom was like, what are you doing? It's hot outside. I was like, oh, I'm brown. I'm supposed to hide it because society, like as a kid, that was like just a factual thing in my head. It wasn't even something I felt because I was like, no one shows like brown people on screen or anything. So I'm supposed to hide too. So I would literally cover myself, which is terrifying because I'm like, I don't know how other little kids feel that way. So I think that like like to see someone that looks like you has a lot more power than what people give credit to.
Yeah, I totally agree with everybody that you have to find the right therapist. There's so many different kinds and you know, if they're not relating to you and your experience, they're not going to really be that helpful. Through the years, I've had probably four different therapists, but you know, one was for relationship issues and marriage things, and then one was for parenting, like how to be a better parent. And then, you know, now recently, just life. The current therapist is like a somatic therapist. So I've always been in my head, and I want a healthier relationship with my body. So I'm learning how to be out of my head and feel my heart and in my body. So there's all so many different kinds, and if somebody has like a really, you know, they're hearing voices or something, though that's a special kind of therapist they need to see to get help. So there's a whole spectrum of ranges and kinds, and you know, I think, I don't know, how would person find that in their community? There's also non-therapists, like if they're in a faith, the faith people might know who to direct them to, or counselors at school. So there are ways, and it's just that matter of connecting the right therapist with the person. Yeah.
So we're getting close to about 10 after the hour. So maybe a good point to start to look toward reflecting. And what we can do is we can go around and take a moment to share something that we're taking away from this conversation, maybe a new idea to sit with, a new point of understanding, or some action steps that we'd like to take based on what we've talked about together. So as you feel led, we can kind of jump into a little bit of reflection, which is kind of happening naturally, but we can just share.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so everyone kind of talked about the importance of taking care of yourself and obviously mental health being health, which I thought was very important. So I was gonna share this thing. So this is what I have a jar at home. It's called Enjoy the Little Things in Life, for one day you'll look back and realize they were the big things. So basically every night before I go to bed, I write one good thing that happened to me that day and I put it in the jar. And what's interesting is like, even the days that are like absolutely crappy, you'll have a hard time trying to pick one thing because you're like, oh my God, this happened. And then this happened. It's just a great dilemma to have every night, to go to bed and be like, oh my God, this happened, this happened. You just value those things. And then you go back and you look at it too. And you're like, oh my God, they were the big things in life. So that's something I've done, which I really like.
That's awesome.
I love that. That's my takeaway. I'm going to email you and ask you about that. I love that I did. Thank you. I journal and I try to do it daily, but usually it's like every other day. A really crazy week, it's like once a week. But I absolutely feel like I can commit to writing down one positive thing a day. I love that idea. Thank you so much.
My daughter has this little book. It's called Moody Cow. And in the book, the kid has all these bad things that happen in the day, this little cow. And then at the end, his grandfather gives him this jar and he fills it with glitter, and he shakes it up, and then he tells them like, these are all the thoughts that are running around in your mind. And as you get still, those thoughts start to calm down and settle down, and then you can settle down with it. And when you first lifted up your jar, I thought you were gonna say it was the movie cow jar, but that's another thing to get still for me, to get still and to meditate and to be mindful that being human is hard. You know, it's a complicated enterprise, and I don't think there's any right way to be human. It's just people doing the best that they can, and that's one of the things I learned when I went to seminary. I don't know what I thought I was going to learn, but what I came out with was that, you know, people are trying their best to figure out how to be the best humans that they can be. And where we make a mistake is I think we try to tell other people how to be the best humans they can be, and say the way we want to be the best human is the way you need to be the best human, or else. And that's where we get stuck. So I appreciate just like hearing all the different perspectives from each of you from different backgrounds, and hearing both the commonalities and the differences, and being able to rest in that, because that, when I remember that, it makes room for my own belonging, for my own uniqueness, for my own, you know, journey, and to just be like, I'm a human among humans trying to figure this thing out, and it's okay. You know, you're gonna make some mistakes along the way, and I just get still and let those thoughts kind of settle. And so I'll be taking that into my like meditation tonight.
Yeah, I love that. I love Moody Cow. It's so cute. I mentioned before that I write a lot of my thoughts down, and I feel like that helps me. I think like one of the reasons that helps is because a lot of times when I try to like explain what I'm feeling to people, it's hard to find the words, and it's easy to feel like, oh, like never mind, like it's not that big of an issue, and it's like I'm overreacting or whatever. And my laptop or paper does not have like any thoughts or feelings, and I can just like rant to it. And I think having like writing out the words and finding the words to like express what I'm going through, somehow it makes it valid and makes my feelings valid. And it feels like, okay, now I have like a way to like, I can like read this to someone, and and like um and like have them hopefully understand what I'm actually feeling. And it's like surprisingly hard, because it's like, oh, you just write that, like I'm sad, I'm happy, or like whatever. But sometimes explaining exactly like why you feel a certain way, like you don't know until you write it, or you don't understand like exactly what happened, like exactly what event triggered you to feel a certain way, I think. And I found like when I write it out, I'm like, oh, I guess it was this. Like this is actually why I'm upset, and things like that. And I really appreciate like Crystal. Thank you for sharing your experience, and Pedro as well, with finding therapy. I think it's definitely a hard journey, and I know, like, I imagine for a lot of people, like, money is also an issue when it comes to that. Um, and I, I'm personally not sure what advice I could give when it comes to that, but I think it's like really, I'm grateful for your experience, like for your sharing your experiences, and to learn like how hard that process can be, but that there is hope of finding someone for you in the end.
I really appreciated you all sharing your experiences, and, you know, the fact that you are, you know, you have things that you do to help support you. And that gratitude at night, you know, that's, I think, an important thing with all the stuff in the world that's bad, to focus where we put our attention is grows, and to think about the good things, even if it's just one little point in the day, that can help us be a little stronger. I personally, I've just been trying to support myself, and I do think mental health and physical health go so together, and that we don't really learn about our bodies and how that affects our minds are affecting our bodies. And the whole thing about fight, flight, or freeze, every single thing that comes at us, either we're going to be relaxed or we're going to be in fight, flight, or freeze. And if we're always in that, we get really, it just drains our bodies. And so one of my things for mental health is I just do a lot of breathing techniques, and breathing techniques are all over the internet. And just a simple one of, I've had to do, it's called box breathing, and I breathe in 4, I hold 4, I breathe out 4, I hold 4. And that whenever I get excited or tense about the world situations and climate change and racism and all the things that are out there and COVID, and I just take some time to breathe. And if people can't afford therapy, they can check out, mindfulness, how to calm down their bodies so that their minds can be at rest. And that's what I hope, that people will look up something and get some help, even if they can't afford a therapist. It's all about the mind-body connection.
Yeah, thanks for lifting that up, Sheila, because I started thinking about that too when Helen brought up about people being able to afford it. And I was like, oh, yeah. I started thinking more about like, what could we do? There's a lot of things we could do that our society isn't choosing to do yet. But that aside, there are opportunities like to go online and to connect if we put our own health at the forefront of our awareness. Then we can, I mean, this conversation alone, people will check out this conversation and they may say, hey, I can identify with one of those people on the screen, and maybe I can look up something, or I can look up meditations online. There's a lot of free resources too to tap into. So I would definitely recommend people looking into those sorts of things.
Yeah, and like, with my mother's grief and just grief of a loss of the way we used to do things, and people dying during COVID and dying every day, not from COVID, whatever it is, grief is an issue we ignore totally.
Oh yeah.
And there's new ways that people are finding to support grief as well. And grief's part of life. It's going to happen, but how do we deal with it to keep our mental health? You can be mentally healthy and still have grief, but if we suppress it, anything we suppress is going to explode. So we've got to find ways to get it out and to support each other. And I think conversations help that, because you hear, hey, I'm not alone. Look at that. We all go to therapists, it's like we all need support. We all, so there's
Join
more
the club.
common that we share than we don't share.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and Crystal, thanks for bringing up the grief, with losing students and stuff, because I know that was one of the things that really got to me as a pastor. Sometimes it's like I might go to the hospital with somebody, and they would, die, and then I'd have to go and do like a meeting about something else, like not that long afterwards, and I didn't have enough processing time, and sometimes. And there was a season where several people closer to my age died, and it was I was holding grief both for the families and for myself and my own mortality, because some people left some kids behind, and I was worried about those things, and that helped me push me to go to therapy more. But there was systemically, there's just like this keep on moving thing in our country, just like keep it going, don't slow down, and that's unfortunate. And I think teachers and people working in certain fields see that a lot, and are expected to just keep going without taking the time to say, hey, I'm hurting right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the book that you mentioned, like the police mental health, if they're going through all that energized adrenaline every day, their mental health, if they don't get help, comes out in tragedies. And we're seeing that every day. And they need to address it. And you know, unmet needs are not healthy, not good mental health. So
Yeah, and I'm not sure if Crystal shared her reflection, but oh, okay. But I also wanted to share that like there are times I think like there are just different types of illnesses like Sushila mentioned, and I have noticed like different sorts of feelings call for different solutions, and sometimes it is like a physical thing. It's like you just need more sunlight or exercise. And I know during COVID, like loneliness was a big sort of factor in mental health. And I think like as hopefully as a society, we can work on finding like putting more resources out there. There are a lot of psychology resources, which are really great. But having those sort of like fixes like okay, this is what happened, what I do to help when I feel lonely and when I feel sad, or you can just wake up one day and feel terrible and like maybe it's like different, like you don't know what sort of solution to like put like, or to how to fix that issue. And um yeah, it's like interesting that I feel like sometimes it's like a quick, like a really unexpected thing can actually fix something like that you've been feeling the whole day or something like that. Um, but yeah.
One thing I was gonna add with like the moving on, like you have to keep going culture. Like one thing I learned in therapy was she said the goal is not to be healthy. I mean, the goal is not to be happy all the time, is to be healthy. And to be healthy, you have to go through every emotion. Like everyone thinks like your normal state should be happy. And I'm like, you don't know what happy. Like I love Inside Out, that movie. I think it does a great job explaining why you should be sad, because you'll understand how to be happy. And once you if you look at sadness as a foreign thing, it's just going to make you more anxious. But if you accept it, it feels a lot better because every emotion is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of them like flavors for food. And it's like, you don't want too much salt or too much sweet or too much whatever. It's just you find that right mix and then you just kind of adjust. Yeah, that's a cool point. And I say that to my kids all the time because they'll say, well, Dad, don't be sad. And I'll be like, hey, I should be sad. This thing happened. It's a sad thing. You want me to walk around grinning and being happy about it? I don't think so. And I wouldn't want them to be. I want the appropriate feeling for the moment. So yeah, that's cool. So we've been really excellent on time. We have about 7 minutes. We've done some reflection. There's a couple things I want to lift up for people who will be checking this out. And then we can stick around for a few minutes for a little bit of extra debriefing after the time is up. But is there any last words, anything that anyone wants to share? Anything on your mind?
I just wanted to say thank you for this. I like moments like this help, and just like, again, going back to belonging, knowing that I'm not alone. And it's just nice to have dialogue with people and talk about things that are happening. So I really just thank you everyone for coming to this space.
Yeah, I'd like to add that having that kind of community and like meeting just kind people, I think that always boosts my mood. And knowing that good people are out there, it's like it. I think like if I ever feel sad, I just think, oh, there are like people who care about issues and who are trying to make a positive change in the world, and that always makes me feel better.
Yeah, the agreements always make this a safe environment, and it makes us like a family. And if this could just be like out there with everybody following following agreements to be kind and respectful, and share time and power or whatever, it would just make a difference in the world. So I really like belonging to this family.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I guess the final thing for me is that I would say is a point of encouragement for folks who see all the things that are happening in the world and get discouraged, which is a natural feeling. And sometimes when we feel discouraged, we feel disempowered. When we feel disempowered, we limit ourselves and our possibilities. But when we see people engage in like how we are, and we have these things in common, and then we have infinite things that we don't have in common, but coming together in this way and being in wonder with each other and about each other opens up lots of possibilities in terms of like how we relate to the world. We're all probably in different states, different backgrounds, all those things. And I think that can serve as an encouragement to folks beyond the words that we've spoken. Just the fact that we can hold space together in and of itself, I think is a gift. And I appreciate everyone taking time to be in those spaces. And I can speak for myself, even though I know how to talk in front of people, like my body always has a hard time talking in like public settings, even though I've done it a lot, my body always like tightens up and I have to like push through it. But then at the end, I feel like, okay, that was worth it though. And so this is worth it. So I appreciate that. And then for folks who may be interested in hosting their own conversation, whether it be on mental health and belonging or any of the other topics that Living Room Conversations has available, we invite you to check out the Living Room Conversations website. There are lots of guides, and you can even create new conversation pathways, all sorts of things available for people who just want to relate, to connect, and to grow. And you can be followed on social media, on all the major social media platforms, and feel free to start conversations yourself. And it's not that hard. It's just a willingness to participate. The guides are there, and get vulnerable and learn from one another. So we thank everyone who's participating as witnesses, and also those who may take this a step for their own conversations in the future. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, all of you. Sweet.